All quiet on the second front.
It's a good name. Mac, I'd love to, man. 100%. You want to do it? Let me know. I'd love to have that conversation. Yeah. You can announce the presidential run.
Yeah.
He's gonna be like, can you stop?
How we doing?
I know.
Ready?
Actually, we
We're talking about shopping.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. After this, we're going to shop it out. 2 seconds.
yes.
Yeah. I don't want to lean it, but.
Yeah. We got your back. Don't worry.
Well attended. I thought there was really going Awesome. Whatever. More than domain. What's that?
Rocky's like, making a cry in a pile.
That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Thank you. That was not an easy choice. We think Ty's coming back. I thought you just dipped. I was like, look at this guy. 3 minutes before being like, dude, I turned my phone off. He's crying for help in there. Can't go get him. No, I did still getting in. Back there to the back. Oh, they won't let me back there. I was like, on the list. They're like, you're later. They wouldn't let me in. Yeah, I was like,
Yeah, thank you.
alright.
Tyler was kicking.
Yeah.
Oh, we had 2 Tylers next to each other.
Well, they don't tie. They don't tie. Alright. We get after it. Chubbs, use your Navy voice.
Oh, yeah. You want me to? All right, welcome everybody. We're going to get started.
Look at that. Sam Gray, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks.
All right, hey everybody. Thanks for being here. Obligatory thank you to AWS and Capital Factory and everybody who makes days like this possible. Really excited, right? We've got a great panel here. I'm not going to go through and bore everybody with bios. You can figure out who's who. It's a really interesting time though to be having this conversation. Current market conditions, right? The fact that in the last 12 months, I think it's become cool to be a national security investor. So everyone who was like a crypto or Web3 enthusiast now is like super passionate about defense, which is neat. I think that's led to some weird incentive and some weird sort of models we're putting together. So we're going to talk a little bit, and I mean SVB yesterday gave us something to talk about in case we get bored. But the whole premise around unicorns and stallions is, you know, should we be trying to build billion-dollar defense tech companies, or should we be thinking about $300, $400, $500 million good capabilities that can be integrated and delivered? I don't know the answer. So we're digging into that a little bit. Where I want to open up is I'm going to start with James. Made eye contact. As you're looking at where we are, last 12 months, sort of all the focus coming in, all of the different conversations, new sources of capital, the changing sort of tenor in Congress about defense tech, about great power competition, all that. Where do you see next 12 months sort of heading? What's this look like for you?
And is this pre or post SVB?
During.
I'll go pre.
Yeah, I'll go
Because
pre.
we don't know what post looks like.
Yeah, fair.
That's a lot. Okay, so on the
Softball question.
Yeah, thanks. On the venture side, yeah, national security is really popular. Anduril and SpaceX were the two largest rounds that were raised in 22. Ton of capital coming in. Software's out of favor. Last year, that might be changing because the Nasdaq slipped a little bit this year. We at the Silicon Valley Defense Group, we're coming out with this thing called the National Security 100, which is what it sounds like. And when we analyze the amount of revenue that the venture-backed defense tech companies are generating from DoD and IC, it's not a lot. I mean, it's like maybe it's $1 or $2 billion total between the top 100 venture-backed companies, and most of that SpaceX.
I was gonna say strip out the big
Yeah.
two.
I mean, honestly, Anduril, if Customs and Border Patrol is national security, then yeah, it's fine. But half the revenue is CBP, everybody knows that's public. But those in our analysis, those companies have raised $38 billion in the last 5 years. So 38 billion divided by 1 billion or 2 billion ain't much. So we don't have a capital problem; we have a revenue problem. So it's hot. The sector's hot because people don't know what else to do, and SaaS is out of favor. And the Ukraine happened, and now we're talking about the Taiwan Strait issues. So there's a lot of money sitting in venture funds. They got to put it somewhere, and I mean, that sector's cool too. Like we do cool stuff.
All right, so
Accounting software is not that exciting, even though it pays the bills. So that's the market answer. On the Hill, I mean, I would defer.
That's what I was just gonna. I literally was gonna ask Mac, and as you're looking at public, private, OSC announced for new sources of capital, new initiatives in the department to try to reach out to some of this commercial tech, some of the deeper tech. It feels like there might be some alignment on the Hill right now between Auth and Approach a little bit. I don't know. I'd be curious for your take as you're looking at the ledge and how everyone's sort of thinking about it and setting conditions for success in the market. Is Congress, what's it look like up there?
From my perspective, there's not really much of an argument anymore about the need to bring in commercial dual-use technologies to national security. We can't just rely solely on the traditional players. We need to broaden it out. But what I'm struck by is there is an incredible amount of agreement, but still it's not happening. And I think the issues are cultural and timing-wise, speed-wise. So just to take an example, I'll pick on appropriators for just a second. It seems to me some greater flexibility in the use of money is part of what's needed, especially if you're talking about DoD buying software, things that are not like aircraft carriers. But that's a cultural challenge on the Hill for appropriators to give up some of that. I want to know exactly how you're going to spend every dollar.
We did it for Joint IED Defeat Organization.
It's happened.
It's happened a couple times.
When there's that sense of urgency,
Yeah.
and so to me that's
a good point.
That's the key thing. There's not yet the sense of urgency that we're going to do things differently than we've done before. But I would just say the second thing briefly on the bank. I think most people on the Hill don't really think about the financing part of tech. While there's no way the taxpayers can come up with all the money that we need to defend the country, so it needs to be part of the calculation. But it'll be interesting to me to see whether this helps people focus, not just on bringing commercial and non-traditional players into DoD and the intelligence community, but thinking about the investment part of what's required to do that.
Yeah. I think one of the things James and I have talked about a bunch is, right, there's a capital side of it. I think that's talked about a lot, right? How do we provide the capital? And I'm going to turn to Anees on this question, because I think the part we forget is we've got all these innovation offices and all these front doors, and you can't fall down in the Pentagon without running into something innovative. But they're all sort of doors to nowhere. Right? You go in and it's a short room and you realize it's a trap, but you've already forked the product and it's too late. Your investors aren't giving you credit for the NRE. You've built some weird fork that doesn't matter. And there's someone on LinkedIn touting you as a success because you got a $50,000 grant. how are we thinking about actual scale and transition? One, from a capability delivery, but two, into meaningful, whether it's production or subscription or whatever sort of metric, real revenue.
With software?
Yeah, software and hardware, I mean, both. But Oscar, these are sort of sitting at the accelerator incubator level, and then Ty, I'm gonna turn to you right after.
Yeah. So what we're seeing right now is we're looking at what's revolutionary, what's evolutionary. What do we need to get to that next level of integration to potential where we can drive collaboration and innovation faster than our adversaries? So I do want to pick on the point of utilizing small businesses without the bureaucracy built in to engage with big DoD to drive capabilities faster, to integrate new and exciting ideas. And then on the other side of it, the funding mechanisms. I mean, we started in Ogden about 1.5 years ago, Ogden, Utah. And
Surprisingly fun place.
it is,
I was shocked. I was like, hey, look, Utah's neat.
we have good beer. No one would think that. But yeah, I mean, we've been able to, in a matter of a year, get $20 million in capital for a classified environment in downtown Ogden. We're looking at all these opportunities, technical investment agreements, partnership intermediate agreements. I agree. We don't have mechanisms to engage with small businesses in the way we want to, but then we also look at VCs. Not leaning on the VCs, and I think that's your unicorn versus stallion. Are you backing your technology to the point that it's sustainable and you have a model that can go and move forward and not just taking the biggest sum of money that you can get? So we train our companies in the accelerator to ensure that they have an understanding of how to keep their IP, how to engage where they need to, and build and grow and build those partnerships. The partnerships are what made us in Ogden. We started from nothing to something. And it was 100% because of our partners like Weber State and City of Ogden. So as we think of that, it's just being able to get SIBRs, being able to get those mechanisms, and then being sure to really get that capability into the hands of the warfighter. It's not some BS mechanism to say like, I'm trying to be good. I usually drop F-bombs, so.
I feel like this is a safe space, but all right. Yeah, these are our people.
He's up here in shorts.
We're cool. Yeah, we're fine.
Yeah, we're good.
No cops.
Yeah, not a cop in sight.
To us, it's not, coming from the DoD,
Big blue guys.
coming from driving innovation and needing that innovation, we don't want to sit there and bullshit people and tell them, hey, we want to get your capability to the warfighter and then have it shelved after a year. I want that capability in the warfighter's hand. Meaning, I will introduce every single person coming from the DoD to program offices, to the people who have the money and the mechanisms to make it happen. And I think that's what's lacking. You have people throw in some really great ideas and you're like, peace, I hope you make it to the other side, and that's not what we want. So,
Yeah.
that's what I would say.
No, and I mean, Ty, so you sit at an interesting spot, right? The sort of intersection of VCs and primes. As you're looking at sort of the ecosystem, I'd be interested almost if it's a unified perspective or if there's sort of like the Horizon X hat and the sort of Boeing hat. But how do you think about, capability sort of development?
Yeah, I'll do my best to unpack that, right?
Yeah.
It's something that we think about a lot. I think in terms of like the root of your question, now that we're a little bit more offensive in mind, right, with the great power competition, right, ultimately we have to create these really sturdy billion-dollar entities that, have strong cash flow, that can stand on their own, that have vendors, that have, that are attracting really compelling engineers and, and some of the best bodies from tech. And that ultimately, if we can kind of build up those layers of that mesh, I think we've done our job well. That said, I think, you really need the support of everybody kind of working together in a tandem. I don't know. I think it's a really challenging question.
Yeah, it's one it's one of the few things I'm not super opinionated on because I don't know. Joshua left. I've always got an opinion. I don't know the right answer to this one.
Yeah.
It's confounding.
I can argue like both sides pretty consistently. So
Yeah.
if you want me to pick a side, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, no, we still got time. We don't want to go all on the first answer.
Sure.
Sam, you're, again, coming out of the Navy, working on the acquisition side, doing some of the innovation, Naval X stuff with Honda, now being out here, sort of sitting at the intersection of all of this, sort of as that convening authority in SVDG. I'd ask sort of what are you seeing and kind of perspective on the state of, right? Because independent of like what should the outcome be, it's sort of a how healthy is the current ecosystem right now, and
Right.
are we creating stallions or unicorns or none?
I think we're really focused on unicorns. I think it's a lot of theater. There's been a pivot, and we're up here kind of talking about it, that defense investing is suddenly cool. We went from a lot of people in the Pentagon and on Capitol Hill coming out to do tech tourism. Now they're doing VC tourism.
Yep.
Like we get a steady drumbeat of like, we want to go meet with VCs. That's good and bad. Like that's just it's not a 1 or a 0. It's good that they're paying attention, that Congress is starting to recognize that, as Max said, this is a way that you can enhance the budget. Even though it's $850 billion, at the end of the day, that gets spread across so many different things. It's actually not a lot of money for a lot of these companies that need to grow rapidly. So you need to have a little bit of theater to drive the awareness, where I think previous innovation efforts, having come from one of them, have largely failed, is developing that pathway from the theater, from the shiny, this is cool and interesting, into an actual program of record. Get these companies, like, we celebrate the fact that we've created 8 now, defense unicorns valued at $1 billion each. We haven't really celebrated where that equipment is going. I mean, really, other than SpaceX and maybe Palantir, none of these folks are putting huge amounts, they don't have production lines churning out a lot of this. Or in the software case, like, they're not doing a lot of compute on this topic.
Can I follow up on that? Because I think the Ukraine is a crystallizing point that hasn't been really examined as much as it should be. A bunch of VC-backed or commercial tech companies were relevant on like day 2 when Russia invaded. And a bunch of them were developed and pulled into the DoD market by DIU, like Hawkeye, Capella, things like that. And like, it seems like it's a proof point that the emerging tech ecosystem can be relevant for national security when things get weird. But for some reason, the DoD's not talking about it, and so there's not a market feedback loop that hey, this worked, it's going well, we want more of it. Here's the revenue that all these companies got. I know most of them, and it's
Who in DoD owns that?
Surprisingly
Like,
not a
so
bunch
when
of
we say
them.
talk about it,
The
who-
services.
Yeah,
I mean,
That's a big
Like,
hand-wavy answer though.
Heidi Shu should talk about it. Whoever owns DIU should talk about it.
Yeah.
There's no executive director at DIU right now to talk about
Tells
it.
you
so they
everything
can't
you need to
talk
know
about
about
it.
defense
We love DIU.
But instead, I'm sorry,
No, please.
but instead, DOD is doing their traditional, we're gonna
Yes.
study Ukraine, and we're gonna have lessons learned in 5 years' time, and then, we'll go from there. That's really.
But that's
And then
more
we'll sort of study
agile,
away.
that's not even waterfall. Like, I mean, there's more waterfall, not agile. Like, you're not moving fast, you're not moving fast as necessary or warfighting capabilities can keep up with. It's just a misservice at that point.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, which side do you want innovation curve you want to be on? Do you want to just harvest it 5 or 10 years down the road, or do you want to get an edge because you're in front of it?
And you should be getting an edge, especially with Ukraine. Identifying, like, I mean, in Utah, we had companies and people coming together and sending freaking drones over. I mean, Best Buy drones.
Yeah.
Not like something spectacular, Best Buy drones to identify where foes were coming across, barriers they knew where they were coming from. That is insane. That capability and understanding of what could get them to warfighting capability is insane, and what they have to use is insane. I think that should be studied. There's a lot of opportunity to really get down to what does a grassroots effort look like in war.
I have a question that we could put back on everybody.
You have to ask my permission. I'm just here so they're entertained.
Curious to get y'all's opinion, just, having, the experience that you've got to date and, more reps within all these cycles. Something that we look for consistently is operator-led businesses, right? Where you've got these founding teams that have field experience that are coming back, and they know the mission set, and they're like, all right, now that we're in a place of power, we're gonna go back and immediately go to solve this one thing, right? Mm-hmm. Is there a paradigm shift in that sense that we're experiencing now? Has it always been that way? Or could this be potentially like a larger unlock for innovation?
I'll defer to Chubbs here. Manages the ecosystem for everybody.
Yeah, I mean,
That is absolutely gonna be the sign on your office now. Ecosystem
that's right.
manager.
Anybody get the license plate of that bus? No, I think it is really great that we're seeing a lot of folks that traditionally the revolving door out of the Pentagon, which I don't use pejoratively. I actually think it's really important that you have people that were actual operators that have used these things. I mean, you keep using the term of like getting this to the warfighter. Like, you have to have people that truly understand how this is going to be used. You know, for decades they were going to the big primes. That was like the general path, is that you go there. I think it's great that a lot of folks see an opportunity that, like, after doing 5 years, 10 years, 20 years in the military in uniform or as like an acquisition professional, you're like, oh, this is interesting. I got my fill of bureaucracy inside the Pentagon. Maybe I can go do something a little bit more entrepreneurial. It tends to follow, this isn't 100% accurate, but it tends to follow the career path they had in the military. So the people who had the higher risk jobs, that's why like every VC fund has to have a seal on it for some reason. Like, right? Like that does happen, and it's the same risk profile. So you get those folks. I think it's really important that they have that, but they can't just have that.
Sure.
One of the worst things is like, I saw this, so I'm gonna go build something that fixes it, with no real understanding that you still have to go back and sell into this massive bureaucracy with very slow sales cycles, and it's hard.
Yeah.
So I really, really like when we see operational teams that has some of that like user experience, but they also have some of the business experience. They have someone who had actually done a startup.
It's the user experience, that tendency to wear the black hat, right, and have larger risk appetite, but then also understand the urgency required to go in and push, right, to attract talent.
I think some of it's
You wear
the,
the black hat a little bit.
I mean, some of it though is, some of the blocking and tackling underneath. Like, I think that's the veneer you've got to remove from a lot of like defense. Like, I can talk about great power competition, and I can talk about innovation, and I can say all the right fucking buzzwords.
Yep.
But it's the not sexy, like not on stage, not front of house. It's the blocking and tackling. It is the work that is required in any regulated industry to scale tech. It's not unique to DoD. It's not unique to the government. That's common. Go try to sell the pharmaceuticals. Go try to sell the fintech. It sucks.
Yeah.
That's how you're gonna scale. It's all the not cool stuff, and everybody forgets about that because it's just fetch to be in defense tech right now. So here's the question though, right? Like, current market conditions, right? We're no longer in this like 0% interest rate where capital's free and everybody gets around, and we're in a spot where like we don't know what SVB is gonna look like coming out. What does this do to the market? What does it do to folks that were maybe leaning in, expecting, you know, it's a little bumpy as you're a new entrant into the defense market, regardless. Again, in optimal conditions, it's not easy. What does it look like now?
I'll answer very quickly.
I'm just lobbing them into the floor, and you guys grab
throw
it.
it to James. So we've seen this happen before. Like, we saw at the very beginning of COVID, there was a lot of articles written that was like, man the lifeboats, capital's gonna be non-existent. Like, some of us worked on projects where we're like, hey, all these startups that we've been pumping SIVers into, they're all gonna fail, right? Like, we rushed to go and move contracts into some of these folks. But that didn't actually happen. I think we learned a false lesson there, that we don't have to have the mechanisms left. And we've been getting a lot of calls in the last 24 hours from Congress, from DoD, from other, from people in this ecosystem on the private side, saying, hey, we need answers. What does government need to do to save us? And I don't think that's a good question to ask. Like, James, you've been through this several times.
Can I drop my F-bomb?
You get.
I don't think it's recorded, so we won't have to go back and delete it
My
either.
day job, I have certain PR standards I have to do. They didn't give a fuck when these companies were healthy. Why they give a fuck when they're not healthy?
Yep.
So who cares? They weren't buying their stuff last week. Why do we have to like go into a panic now to help them when they're not going to buy it this week? So there you go. If you want to gossip about SVB, we can do that.
No, I'm curious.
Hours on the phone.
I think
Curious though. I think there's going to be an interesting like consolidation, kind of like a different Last Supper that happens, where potentially some interesting tech is grabbed up and rolled in. It's a question of, does that get rolled into sort of newcos, or does that go into
I
primes?
think we should let Mac reflect on the political realities of trying to bail out a venture-backed ecosystem. But I would say if I were a prime,
We're from the government. We're here to help.
Prime contractor.
Great.
I'm ready to go shopping on this.
Well, that's 100% what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Where's my primes at?
I think that's true. The only thing I'd add is, remember that the natural bureaucratic reaction of government is when something happens that you see as bad, then you're gonna regulate it. You're gonna prevent it from ever happening again. And so one of the things we just have to watch out for is some sort of constraint that will hamper future innovation.
Yeah.
Because of what's happened here. And so you step back again and look at DoD procurement, somebody did something wrong, so they put a new layer of oversight, or Congress did or something, and you just add that on top. And I just think in this situation, you want to be careful that you don't allow something to happen that will hinder us in the future.
Yeah. Ty, I'd be curious, you just, like I said, the prime, Chubb's alluded to, I feel like these
Yeah.
are at a really interesting vantage point right now with what's happening.
Look, I think ultimately, it's an opportunity for us to learn from a venture perspective, right? It's an opportunity for our leadership teams, for our portfolio companies to get better and to basically consolidate their thinking and strategy. We're gonna see, this isn't the end of the world. It's certainly not the end of the world for everybody and every portfolio company. Constraints will be put in place. I think we get better as a vertical because of additional constraints, and I think we get better as founding teams with additional constraints. And I think it's just another opportunity for us to really grow through it, for the cream to rise.
Yeah.
And as VCs, I don't like that word, but as VCs to go in and show our founding teams, how much we're gonna roll up our sleeves and work with them in times like these, as opposed to being like, sorry you guys, don't have money for payroll, on Tuesday, but it's how do we stay up all Saturday night, all Sunday night, working with them to make sure that they feel confident going into Monday morning.
I mean, to go on your point though about allowing some of the cream to rise, I think that's an interesting point. I think we've all talked about this probably one-to-one in small groups. It's not necessarily a bad thing for there to be a little bit of culling of the herd, right? The same joke about like every VC is now like a defense thought leader. Like everyone now has a defense tech startup because like you could just like show up at AppWorks and get a simmer for a few years, and like it was really easy to get a seed round, and like now it's not. And the fundamentals that weren't forced because there were no constraints, right? There were no guardrails. There's no governance. Now all of a sudden it's a ton of governance and some scarcity.
Yeah.
Right? Is that good? Chubbs, I'll tell that one to you because it's tough.
Well,
is that
yeah,
good for the ecosystem?
I mean, that's really started. It's not specific just to Silicon Valley
No.
Bank. I mean, this
No.
actually started with the financial downturn about 8-9 months ago, where it but we're seeing something interesting where it's really sort of like a K-shaped recovery, right? Like there are a lot of companies that cannot raise capital, but those that can, like the very top tier, are raising an insane amount of capital.
Yeah.
We're still seeing the same issue of overvaluation of companies, and I think it goes to a lot of the investors are excited by this and interested, but they don't really know the fundamentals of the defense industry, which is very different than all of their previous experience, particularly like if you were an enterprise SaaS investor and you're expecting like, oh, this company just jumped from 10 million to 30 million in rev, like I'm gonna give them a $500 million valuation. Like, okay, that's probably not true in defense. Defense, if that was defense revenue is really lumpy, it's weird, it shows up at odd times, and it can disappear overnight, no matter the size of it, and it happens all the time.
Yeah. And as you're looking, one, sort of geographically, like standing up a new ecosystem, and not one that's, probably on the list of like a ton of VC and private capital, at least as from the outside looking in, it's not one someone thinks. Where do you see it sort of change some of the constraints that these organizations, these companies are facing, and sort of how they're thinking about it?
So I think we kind of changed the narrative a little bit and challenged how we do business. So being in Ogden, being off the Hill Air Force Base, coming from Hill Air Force Base, seeing better ways of doing business and wanting to adopt them. I mean, even coming here a year ago and asking questions, being proactive, I don't want to make the same mistakes that others have made. We're seeing huge opportunities and I did host a VC summit last year where we had probably billions of dollars on a stage and nobody knew. This guy comes in with 2 different shoes on, and I'm like, who the hell are you? And he's like one of the richest guys in the world. Shut up!
I know who that is.
But I'm just like, not only is he badass, but I mean, after you got past the shoes, you're just like, wow, like this is amazing. But I think we're changing that narrative. I mean, now we see engagement from Silicon Slopes and other companies. We have this whole ecosystem of aerospace and defense standing up, and we also have the largest modernization capability at Hill Air Force Base, Sentinel. So you see, there was like a crew of people coming because nobody was talking about it. And now we are. Now we're bringing situational awareness to where you can get funding, where you can collaborate. And then the big thing is we sit with the DoD.
Yeah.
So it's not some like, oh, well, it's an idea over here. No, go talk to that person because he actually works on the platform. Get your user experience, but also know that you have business, IP patent lawyers. Like, we have all of that in our ecosystem now, and we're trying to drive it to building better companies and building them sustainably so they can stand on their own and utilize their dual use technology.
It's a good segue. Ty, as you're talking to new founders, younger companies, what advice are you giving them? Kind of going forward on the next 12 to 18, right? Current round and next round, sort of bridging, how to think about it.
I look for single points of failure, you know, in your product roadmap, in your market roadmap. Just find single points of failure and try and diversify around them as much as possible. I mean, it's, you know, because if you have a single point of failure, whether it be, you know, a customer that, you know, is 70% of your revenue base, you know, you're just, that customer owns you, you know. Yeah.
And James, I'd be curious, you know, talking about sort of that revenue sort of centralization around single customers. We talked about the lumpy nature, the sort of odd nature of defense revenue. How are you talking to portfolio companies around de-risking, thinking about what does that look like? Hey, are you one contract, one procurement action, one administrative action away from being non-viable, like default dead?
Yeah, I'll put the question around, what could be the fallout of the SVB situation. So on Monday, we'll find out if these companies get 0 to 100% of their cash back. And it's gonna be weird, right? Like the innovation ecosystem, the capitalization will across the board drop by some percentage.
Yeah.
What it is. And the sad news for our kind of mission set is that a lot of these companies need a long gestation period, especially if they're hardware based. And people were asking me last night, isn't it good if we let the weak ones die? And yes and no. A lot of these companies will scrabble for 2, 3, 4 years, and then when the tech in the moment and the customer comes together, they'll crush it. Like in 60 days, they'll get a ton of orders that transform the company. And if that happened last week, we're all excited. But if it was gonna happen 2 weeks from now, but they missed payroll and lost half the cash, and they did layoffs
Yeah,
this week.
rift in between,
And those contracts are coming, and now they can't execute. That's sad. So that's kind of episodic.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. I mean, like, I'm shell shocked. Like, I don't know what's gonna happen Monday morning. We're talking to everybody. Like, it's literally, like, how do you make payroll? Like, is the founder rich? Can the founder cover payroll? Like, that kind of stuff's going on. And the knee-jerk reaction is, well,
so why you have a billionaire founder in defense tech,
why don't
right?
the VCs just cover payroll? Well, we don't have capital, we call it from our LPs. Who are our LPs? The pensions, the nonprofit endowments, right? So this is where the message of Congress, like, the amount of rich folks who have all their money in the VCs, like, it's 20% of the capital. 80% of it is like pensioners, and most of them are public employees, like cops and firemen and like municipal employees. So, like, that bailout conversation needs to be had behind the scenes, because you can't sell it in the front lines. So if we wanna call capital to fund payroll next week, the problem is all of our LPs bank is Silicon Valley Bank too, and they can't get their capital out to hit the wire to do the capital calls. The whole thing is like, it's gonna get crazy in the next 7 to 10 days, and we'll see what happens on the other side. So the timing for defense tech, especially hardware, I'm so ecstatic about Office of Strategic Capital. Because if you can look at some companies and say, that technology is valuable for national security, we want to integrate it, we're going to palm it, and 3 years from now, we're going to get you on contract, but if you got to do what you got to do, go through the bureaucracy, that's fine. We'll put a loan up for your factory, so you, like you said, fork, right? Fork's the software word, but in reality, like, I got hardware companies that are cranking to like Rivian and Tesla and this stuff, but the stuff could go on UAVs too, right? Valkyries and Skyborg.
Yep.
They're not gonna do that with private capital, but if Jason would step in and say, I'll fund the expansion of your factory, one more production line to take wire harnesses out that we gotta get from China and Mexico, and we'll do flex circuits printed from a 3D printer in like San Mateo, California, and Jason funds that with a loan.
That's a game changer.
That's good business for the government, and it helps national security. So I feel like the establishment was just starting to get sophisticated, like what DOE is doing with these battery factory loans, but then the SVB thing happened where now we need help overnight.
Yeah.
And, you know, policymakers aren't used to reacting overnight unless I hate, this is pretty dark, but for the innovations, so for the innovation stuff to really pop, you have to have, I hate to say this, but, you know, in the GWAT, right, like, JIDO got stood up because guys are coming home without arms.
Yep.
Right, and so all of a sudden, money overnight, you can do whatever you want with it. We had anti-IED stuff, the MRAPs, all the whole thing. Either people got to get fired or people got to get hurt, or else the bureaucracy is not going to accelerate.
Yeah.
So I would love to see some 4-stars get fired because they're not taking enough risk with the technology and counter.
Like it.
Don't fire the VCs, fire the.
So Chubbs, as you're, thinking about this, and you got Jason announcing the memo and stuff this weekend, right? Like, so DoD calls on Monday, and they call you, and there's, what's your ask?
Well, one, I'd say to James's earlier point, like, you're too late. I mean, this is the same thing we saw with production of PPE during COVID, right? It was like, suddenly we need to go exercise this muscle that we've never exercised before. Like, we're gonna pump $1 trillion through DPA, an office that was doing like tens of millions before that.
Like
on
four
a very,
people in it.
yeah, exactly. Like, you can't just build this up overnight.
Yeah.
But they do have some teams in place that can, potentially help. What I would tell them as a warning is like, these companies are going to get desperate, and they will take money. Like, they will take money from places they wouldn't have taken money before. We've talked a lot previously about adversarial capital. Like, say you are a dual-use company. Like, you might just decide, okay, we're going to drop the dual-use part, and we're just going to focus on commercial because we have to take money from China.
I guarantee you, they're calling.
Yep.
Oh,
All
100%.
weekend long.
Phones are ringing right
You can't
now.
make payroll? Oh, well, Uncle whoever's family office out of Singapore can help you make payroll.
Right.
It's going on right now. Like, we had dinner with, the CI people last night. Like, you kicked all the China money out over the
Right.
last 4 years, great. Well, now the American money's not working because we got a problem with the banks.
And
Where you get the money from?
And when we kicked the China money out, they found other ways to get it in, right? It was very obvious 3-4 years ago. It was very clear this is China money. Like, you could see, it was like,
We're using the term kicked out like this was a successful thing. I appreciate it.
It's
Super fucking optimistic.
It's 100%.
Oh, we solved that problem, guys. Don't worry.
But now
Sick work, America.
Now it's more sophisticated. Success, man.
Yeah, just ring the bell, go home.
Yeah.
Ty, as you're sitting, like I said, the Boeing sort of large capital side of it, what are you talking to Portcos about? I know yesterday was crazy for you. What are you telling these founders? How are you talking about what's going to happen on Monday, about new sources of capital, about bridge, about
Can't put his wallet.
We're just being, can't put my wallet. We're being honest, man. I mean, we don't have a crystal ball, right? I mean, we're trying to we're taking all this in stride. Just being really open, communicating, listening. I mean, first trying to identify, all the biggest pain points first, right? And then, how are we going to go about solving it? Wherever, it's not.
Yeah, no, I'm not
there's,
into it.
there's no.
DOD doesn't want to pick winners and losers, but the VCs are going to have to pick winners and losers next week.
Yeah. What does that look like?
But they pick themselves in some
Yeah,
weird
that's fair.
sense too, right?
Yeah.
Like we have, several of our portfolio companies were able to get money out Thursday morning, right? So, it kind of gets back to the leadership team comment that I made previously, right? Like some people did get their money out. Some people aren't going to be spending all weekend, in triage mode. They're going to spend all weekend strategizing as to how they can, capture more market share on Monday and Tuesday because they're going to be beating out their competition.
Yep.
But for those of, we also have people that didn't, and we're trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, I wish I had an answer for you, but I'm not.
No, it's, anyone has it, that's why it's interesting. So I'm gonna throw this one to the group. As we're looking at things like Jason and the Office of Strategic Capital, and you juxtapose that with still no DIU director, with this like weird hydra of innovation where there's just like openings everywhere, but it doesn't go anywhere. Are you talking to some of these early stage companies and telling them to wait to make a pivot into defense? Are you suggesting they come in now and it's directed defense, or is it come in through primes and partnerships? What's that look like? What's the path you're sort of telling people to think about right now?
So I almost never tell a company to go all in on defense.
Such a bad idea.
It's like,
Terrible idea.
right, and this is my bread and butter. Like, I make money off of the
Yeah.
fact that companies want to do this, sorry, Mac. So, yeah, I mean, I think companies that have, are diversified, that have multiple pathways to generate revenue are the most interesting.
Yep.
And, there are times when you can pivot into defense, but never all into defense, unless you are one of those extremely unusual companies, an Anduril, right?
You got a billionaire founder.
Yeah, you have a billionaire
Yeah, it's
founder, you've
different
raised
game.
an obscene amount of capital, so like you can do things that just are unnatural in the standard venture ecosystem. So it's I think
I'd agree with that. I mean, so we see dual use technology, we talk about it so lightly, but a lot of the mechanisms that we use in the DoD and the needs in the DoD don't just relate to the DoD. They relate across the board to industry, like commercializing technology. That needs to be the center of what we're paying for. Even the DoD through SIBRs, it's dual use technology. It's not DoD technology that we're paying for with Server Phase 2. We want people to come in and have the opportunity to walk parallel paths to funding and not put it all on red on the DoD, because it's not gonna, it may become something amazing and it may not. But we just don't want that. We want that technology to stay here in the United States. We want that technology to be backed here in the United States and not go to our adversaries, but you do have to run that dual use path.
And I think kind of from a broader policy perspective, there's two things. One is national security is a lot broader than we have traditionally thought of it, so it brings in more different kinds of technology. And secondly, it's come up a couple of times, put all your eggs in one basket and you're maybe risking things. The one of the most common words one hears is resilience, and that can mean a lot of different things. But one of the things it may mean, and COVID, back to Chubb's point, kind of opened our eyes on this generally, is don't be completely dependent upon somebody else, particularly a particular adversary, for something that's really important to you. So this diversification of sources of supply, if you're a company, diversifications of income streams, that helps the whole ecosystem. And I think there's an understanding that that's where we need to go, but back to my original point, just because we understand it and all the studies tend to agree and all the think tanks tend to agree, doesn't mean that the implementation is getting done.
Yeah, I wonder, generative AI is the hottest topic in the street right now.
Move over, metaverse.
Yeah, you think the JIG or the Chinese are figuring out how to deploy general AI in a war fighting situation faster? I don't know the answer to that question. I have a guess.
I think we have some people that have pretty strong opinions here in the audience.
Yeah,
I'm gonna call them out.
I'm looking at a bunch of eyes lighting up. Nope.
Well, I think we got stuck for a really long time around debating the ethics of AI, which is incredibly important. You have to have that. On the other hand, we're a massive country with a huge policy and defense base. Like, you can do both simultaneously. To your point about is this waterfall? Like, yes, we just sat there waiting, saying, well, we should talk about the ethics of using AI in combat. And I was like, okay, but combat exists, and there are other people that are going to move forward. Don't you think we should at least be moving simultaneously on actually moving forward? And by the way, this is not general AI. This is not Terminator. This is very simple use cases we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
we're still
like
trying to figure out
direct
preventive
paths.
maintenance.
Right. Exactly.
Predictive maintenance.
Yeah.
We're not doing drone warfare in the Ukraine.
Right. But your car can use
The bad guys
AI for
are.
predictive
I
maintenance.
know. Meow. F-35 meow.
All right, so I think we've got just under 10 minutes left. So what I want to do is kind of go one to one. I want each of you to do 3 things. One. You got it.
I know, I was like,
Well, that was my first thought too. All right, fuck it, we'll do one.
do one.
All right. So we got a diverse audience. We know a bunch of folks out. We've got folks who are building. We've got folks who are investing. We've got folks who are running companies. Sort of, what's your message about not the SEB? I know we're not going to understand sort of what's going to happen on Monday and all that, but what do you want to see? If you could say, hey, this is the direction I go. This is how I think about things. What's your sort of message to lead everybody forward in the next 12 to 18? We'll start with Ty, and we'll go this way.
I'll come at it from a software perspective because that's my focus. What I would say is, if you have a vertical product, make sure your vertical product is going to be easy and quick and easy to deploy. And then within that vertical, it solves several different use cases. If you have a horizontal product, I would make sure that you're going to be able to reach penetration in that wider aperture of market segments. And you've got the capital, necessary to go after each one of those, various subsectors. Is that enough?
You're doing great, yeah. I mean, I see the theme though of discipline, right? Of fundamentals, and I've seen that through a bunch of the conversations today. It's returning to those fundamentals that I think we all know.
Yeah.
And market conditions absolved us of the responsibility to have to adhere to those for years because capital was so cheap, right? And its contracts were easy, small contracts, so there wasn't that very strong discipline at a founding team level. Like, you were allowed to get a little loose about it.
Yeah, but there was at the really great shops.
Agreed. I agree with that.
And I think that's still, that has to define your culture.
Yeah.
Even when, cash was quote unquote free, there was still fantastic constraints and fantastic
Right.
culture within the really good shops.
Yep.
Right?
Right.
People held themselves accountable. And I just don't think it's any different now. I think that still puts people, at the front of the pack.
Okay, I like that. Ma'am?
Okay. So if you're a small business trying to get into the DoD, understand that if you're closer to the program offices, you're more than likely to get funded. Don't go off and sit in some realm that's really badass but has no program managers or program offices sitting there with funding ready to pay you. And then BCs, watch those companies. That's my favorite thing in the accelerators, is sit back and watch these badass companies come through and be like, so Bob over there, he doesn't know, but they're gonna hit it big, and they usually do.
Yeah.
It's so easy and so beautiful to watch. In software engineering, holy shit, hold on, it's gonna get real crazy here soon, so it's exciting. So that's all I've got.
I like it. Chubbs?
I spend most of my time talking to commercial companies that are thinking about entering this market,
Yep.
right? They've usually hit product market success in commercial, like they're a little bit later stage. What I tell all of them is, you actually said it earlier, like, think of this as the most complicated markets you think of. Think of going into the financial sector, going into health tech. You don't do that without a very strong plan, and that plan has to constantly be updated and adapted. I see too many times that we let companies get away with, like, wrapping themselves in the flag and saying, I'm doing this for national security, I need to build this thing this way, and they have to buy it.
Yep.
No, they don't.
Yep.
And they probably won't. So build that plan and constantly adapt it and see where it's going.
Okay. Mac?
Of course, I'm on the political level.
That's by design, though. We got all these different vantage points. That's why this is neat.
Are you announcing?
No. Margaret Thatcher used to say, first you gotta win the argument and then you can win the vote. And everybody in this room has contacts and circles of influence to help us win the argument that we can't just lumber along like we have been without the sense of urgency to do things differently at DoD. And using your spheres of influence to help win the argument, Congress and the bureaucrats will follow. But they've got to see that they're going to be embarrassed if they don't help us be better prepared for this world that is moving at a much faster pace than we can keep up with right now. To me, that's kind of the fundamental. Everybody knows what needs to be done. It's just having the sense of urgency to do it.
Check. Well done. Take us home.
I kind of forgot the question, so I'm just gonna say something.
Just go. The floor is yours.
And I'm sad my uniform guys walked out, so I want to yell at some people, then I want to kiss some ass. Innovation units, like, stop fucking around. If you're not getting users and buyers of tech to the table with the providers of tech, you're wasting everybody's time. And now, I don't mean, like, that's the innovation, like, the business people think about. I get that there's cultural and organizational innovation. There is value on moving sticky notes around whiteboards and helping your bureaucracy, whatever, do things differently. I get that, go hire McKinsey. We're talking about doing business. So get
James
people-
pays a lot for
Get
sticky
people to the
notes.
table when you do the
You know.
meetings. All right. So, and I love the innovation units. I mean,
Thank you.
this guy over here. And then secondly, I want to kiss some ass. I think I define the national security innovation base as very broadly. And I remember when we launched my first dual use fund, we sat down with a bunch of DASDs and all these muckety mucks, and it's like 2017. I said, I think the big tech is the new industrial base, and Apple and Facebook and Amazon and Google are the defense industrial base, and everybody looked at me like, this is crazy. Well, now we're sitting here because Amazon is hosting us, right? So now nobody would argue that fact. So the key here is I am so excited about the leaning in from the new tech companies and the traditional guys like Lockheed and Raytheon who are putting their free cash flow to work to go help these young companies explore the national security market. And we talked about this Last Supper idea. In 1995, the Last Supper was SecDev sat down with all the primes and said, I got too many of you, go away, merge, and now we got 5 instead of 25. The new Last Supper is sit down, stop doing all these repos and dividends, start putting some money into some of these emerging technology companies, help them come into our ecosystem. So the primes and the new big tech guys have all the relationships to the PEOs. The hardest thing in Silicon Valley to do is get a meeting with the PEO exec. I've been there since 1998 as a defense investor. I've seen one PEO person in 25 years of doing defense investing. So innovation people, get your PEOs and your users to the table, and thank you primes and new big tech companies and medium tech companies for helping with your free cash flow and doing the venture thing. Thank you for the CVC stuff. I think it makes a difference. In software, I don't want a strategic investor anywhere near my portfolio. In hardware or national security, I'm trying to get as many CVCs and the new tech and the old tech and the investment case as I can get in that cap table because we gotta have their help. And they're doing it. And that's new. 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, there was like 1 or 2. Now everybody's kind of getting into it. So I think it's a very good sign for going forward.
Love it. All right, I'm gonna soft land this thing. Look, we can talk about this all day. We can talk about this like this happy hour conversation we all have at different dinners. I want to thank AWS, specifically Amber and Rich for help make this possible. Thank the panelists, guys. I know everybody's got shit to do, so I appreciate you doing some shit with me. And everybody here. So thank you guys, and ask them more questions after. They're the smart ones. So
Awesome.
on time.